Thank you, Santosh. I hope I'm audible to everybody. And yes, so what I intend doing is for the next 40 minutes or so, I will be talking about three main issues which have happened under the Modi government, which has weakened our national security. I'll be talking about them, dwelling in some details, and thereafter we can have the discussion on the subject. So the three issues after 2014, once this government came to power, that I intend to discuss are: first is the politicization of the military, how it has weakened the Indian military and how it has exposed the vulnerabilities of the Indian military to our adversaries. The second issue that I'll be talking about is the revocation of Article 370 from Jammu and Kashmir, and the creation of the new maps. The new maps which were created immediately after that, which made Ladakh as a union territory and Jammu and Kashmir also as a union territory. So this has three implications. One is that it has completely alienated the Kashmiris to a point of no return. They feel totally betrayed. I will explain the implications. Second, this has brought uh, People's Liberation Army, which is the army of China in Ladakh. As we all are aware, in April 2020, they came and they are supposedly occupying something like 1,000 square kilometers of Indian territory, and they are still occupying that, and we have not been able to do much about it. The third thing, implication that I'll be talking of is that this has made the creation of new maps. It has made the possibility of a two-front war in Ladakh absolutely real. A threat which has always been there since independence, but all governments were very careful to make sure that India really never faced a two-front war situation. That is precisely where we are standing today. And the third issue that I'll be talking about is India's participation in the quadrilateral dialogue, which is the core of the American Indo-Pacific strategy for Asia-Pacific region. I'll be talking about that and how willingly and how aggressively the Modi government has gone and participated in Quad, and what are the implications of that, which are absolutely dire implications, I believe. And I believe, and I have no hesitation in saying that this is my analysis that I have put in, I'll be putting in my coming book as well, that unless the Modi government reverses its policy vis-a-vis Quad and the Americans as a very active participant there in their strategy, we could well end up with a war anytime between 2 to 5 years. To recall recently, I think it was yesterday when the Chinese General Secretary Xi Jinping, he made a statement. He said that the complete unification of China is a must. But he spoke about peaceful unification with Taiwan. He never mentioned Arunachal Pradesh, which they call South Tibet and which they claim, which is about close to 90,000 square kilometers. That is where I envisage a problem coming up. So now let's see those three things that I mentioned. The first is the politicization of the military. First of all, what does it mean? It simply means that the political objective and the military objectives of a nation should never be the same, cannot be the same. I will explain. This means that whenever, let's say, we are in talks with Pakistan, India and Pakistan, they are in talks. Now, what happens is there is a deadlock then. Things are not moving at all. And it concerns our core concern. We need to do something. So that is the time a nation decides, any nation decides, well, I'm talking of India, Pakistan, let's say A and B nation, they have come to a deadlock. And then A nation decides that, all right, I want to use military force to break the stalemate. So what you do is you use the military force, and as a consequence of the military result, which come out favorable, because you have used it after seeing all the implications and that, yes, I can achieve certain objectives. Thereafter, again, the political process starts. In other words, any nation uses its military force for the breaking the stalemate in the political talks. It does not use the military force for political objectives. The moment you use that for political objectives, which this government has done on 2 occasions, I will explain, that means you have politicized the military. The military, instead of doing their job, what they are supposed to do for the nation, is actually doing the job for the party, the ruling party. So the 2 instances that I am talking about, first of all, even before I go there, in October of 2014, this is a very significant month, because in May 2014, Prime Minister Modi came to power. In October, he held his first Combined Commanders Conference. Combined Commanders means basically the Army, Air Force, Navy, the top echelons, they are addressed by the Prime Minister himself. Now, in that, he made a very astounding statement. He said the enemy is known. This was in reference to Pakistan. The enemy is known, but the threat is invisible. In other words, he identified terrorism as the threat. And this is the threat that this government has identified all along. And we recently heard even which is unfortunate, we heard our former National Security Advisor, Shiv Shankar Menon. He spoke and he wrote about that cross-border terrorism is not an overarching threat for India, and we have been able to manage it. Now, please see that when we talk of cross-border terrorism, when we talk of terrorism, this is not a threat. It is a military strategy. The threat is the Pakistan Army. So if you are trying to manage the military strategy, you will never go anywhere. Basically, you keep losing your men, which is precisely what we have been doing in this proxy war with Pakistan. So the threat is Pakistan Army. That is, we have to build a capability where the Pakistan Army and the Pakistan military should feel that, yes, they have a credible capability, a credible deterrence, and we should stop, or maybe we should modify our strategy of cross-border terrorism. That is something, it's not happened. And Prime Minister Modi, or this Modi government, has made that strategy look like a threat, which it is not, as I explained you. As a consequence of this is what I call politicization of the military. And the first instance of this were the so-called surgical strikes which happened. We got to know, you may all recall, on the 29th September 2016, we were told by the Director General Military Operations, the man who controls the operations in the Indian Army, a fellow called Lieutenant General Ranbir Singh. He held a press conference along with the MEA spokesperson, and he told the nation that last night we did surgical strikes on terrorists. And we also informed Pakistan that we have done the surgical strikes and no further mission will be done. So this is what he did, was something no professional should have done. Let me explain. Surgical strike is it's a very sharp military word. It has a very definitive meaning. What it means is, number A, you do the strike against a legitimate target, military target. A legitimate military target is the Pakistan Army. Terrorist is not a legitimate military target. Then the second thing is, you do a surgical strike. Instead of fighting at the contact line, you actually do something in the depth so that the entire war is affected, or at the highest level, at the strategic level, what we say, the government gets affected. That is a surgical strike, and it is normally done by the Air Force, for that air power has the reach. which the army, the soldiers can never have. So when you have a professional like Lieutenant General Ranbir Singh saying that we have done the surgical strike, you see, it sounds very unreal. I mean, what is this guy talking about? And on top of that, he said that we informed Pakistan. You never inform the adversary. You just wait and let the adversary guess what will be your next step. That is the whole idea of surgical strike. By informing Pakistan, basically you told them that we were not prepared for a war escalation. So what did Pakistan do? They did nothing. They just kept quiet. And we started celebrating the surgical strike because in the first place, we have done far better things in military terms when the last government was here. For example, when the Manmohan Singh government was here, that is the time the Indian Army has done what is called raids. A raid is a military action where your army, your soldiers go and they go and do something at the Pakistan army post. They do some damage and come back. They also, it used to be both ways. That's a military action, a raid. So what actually the government did was the counter-terror operation that they have been doing since inside the hinterland, inside our own territory, they went a few kilometers inside Pakistan-occupied Kashmir and they attacked the launch pads. Launch pad is a temporary place where the terrorists, once they are trained, let's say by the Pakistan army, and before they are being launched into our territory, where an opportune time is being sought as to when they should be launched, they are there for a couple of hours. So obviously we had the intelligence, the human intelligence, that all right, there are 5 launch pads where the terrorists are there about to be launched. There were 3 land launch pads north of Pir Panjal and 2 were south of Pir Panjal. So a small counter-terror operation. Now, it's not small as far as our soldiers are concerned. It is an act of bravery for the soldier to go inside enemy territory, even if you go 100 yards. But insofar as the military leadership is concerned, it's shameful what they have done. They did counter-terror operations. What they did in the hinterland, our own hinterland, a bit across the line of actual control, and they raised the level of it. They made it sound like something very big. And instead of it being an action at a low level, you see a brigade, a small level can do it. The army commander was involved and the Prime Minister's office was involved. And then after 1 year, there was celebration also of the Vijay Diwas. We did surgical strike. The point is that the military I'm making is that the army leadership was complicit in this. This is what I call a unprofessional behavior. And when you are unprofessional, that is the time you get politicized. That means instead of doing what you are supposed to do, you are basically doing something to help the politics of the country. That is politicization. Now, how could the Air Force be left behind? They also wanted to do something because this is where you got the pat on the back from the government. So the next we knew was Balakot air attacks happened just before the elections of 2019, the general elections. Now what happened was on the 26th February 2019, this attack we had, you see, on the line of control, on the, which is between India and Pakistan, there is what is called air defense systems, which are supposed to detect if there is any aircraft which crosses the airspace. Now, there are certain areas up in the north where obviously around the clock, you do not put your air defense radars and you don't put everything up active because you're not expecting anybody to do this. And you then want to conserve power also. I mean, unless there is a war, unless there is a crisis, you don't do a thing like this. So what we did was on the 26th of February, we went inside the airspace. 3 or 4 of our Mirages went in. We used what the Israeli bombs, which is called Spice. Now, the Spice has a standoff range of 60 kilometers, which basically means that it can fire 60 kilometers and get the accuracy, which means that our aircrafts were there precisely at night. They could evade the radar. The radars probably were not functioning of the Pakistan Air Force. They went inside for precisely about 5 or 6 minutes and they came back. For any professional Air Force, it will take something like 10 to 15 minutes when they to scramble their jets to take on the threat. So this is the way it was planned. And whenever you see a spice bomb or any modern smart weapon, you automatically, the weapon gives you the damage assessment. Where are the pictures? I mean, the government said that we had gone and hit a madrasa and we killed so many people, but where are the pictures? Simple as that. No pictures were shown. That is the point. And what did the Pakis do? The Pakistan Air Force next morning on 27th February, they came in a package of 24 aircraft in broad daylight, 9 o'clock in the morning, and created confusion in our airspace. They got in, they threw the bombs, and they made sure in an area where there were a lot of troops, because even they did not want war. They threw the bombs at places with precision where our troops were not there, so that no casualties happened. And then they went back. And in the bargain, what happened? Now let's see. We lost a MiG-21. Wing Commander Abhinandan was made prisoner of war. Why he became prisoner of war is because the communications which he was supposed to have with the ground station, they were jammed by the Pakistan Air Force. This is called electronic warfare. So they proved that the electronic warfare systems were better than what the Indian Air Force had. We exposed our vulnerability. Not only that, our air chief should have known that these guys will strike. How can you be comatose the next morning? When you know that a strike is imminent, when you know that you see, it's now you have created a war-like situation, a crisis situation, a conflict situation, what do? You create an air corridor. First of all, no aircraft is allowed unnecessarily to take off. And if it takes off, it follows a corridor. Nothing was done. Because we hit our own MiG-17, killed our own 7 people by our own missile. The helicopter took off from Badgam and it was downed. The helicopter came down by our own missile, which mistook it to be an enemy aircraft. So this is the damage that we had. And now we claim that, one of the F-16s were destroyed, but where is the evidence? See, nothing moves if you can't show the evidence. The Americans are saying that the number of F-16s we gave to the Pakistan Air Force, we have checked them and they're all there with them. So the point I'm making is that when the Pakis came on the 27th, their Air Force, the Indian Air Force conceded, their senior officers conceded that yes, what they did was an act of war. If it was an act of war, why didn't you escalate? Because that was not your narrative. Your narrative was the political narrative. Your objective was the political objective instead of being a military objective to just strike, to just go there, throw the bomb and come back. And it had implications. I mean, we all know it had political implications. It influenced the elections of the 2019. We all know that. So what has all this done for us? What it has done for us is that whereas our soldiers and our young officers, they are extremely brave, but the burden of war has been put on their shoulders by the senior military leadership, which is politicized. Now, if your senior military leadership is politicized, a Jawan is never politicized. He gives the life for the nation. When your senior military leadership is politicized, it obviously doesn't understand the enemy. So what did we do? I mean, the present army chief, General Naravane, He was, before coming here, the Eastern Army commander against China. How is it that he didn't know what sort of Chinese, what was there? Because we never did any study of the Chinese. We only took that Pakistan is our enemy. And Chinese we can handle diplomatically, which we have done. We have been able to balance them. So this is so much about politicization of the military, that today military is politicized. And when I say military is politicized, I'm only referring to the leadership and the senior leadership, not the middle level leadership, because there are a lot of this middle level, officers who are in touch with me, who are doing their PhDs in various, disruptive technologies. They consult me on this. I help them out. So I'm only referring to the senior leadership. Senior leadership politicizes a danger for the country because it weakens your sovereignty. Now, I come to the second point. The second point is about revocation of 370 and creation of new maps. I was in Kashmir. I was in Kashmir about 10 days back. I spent a few days there talking to people, all sort of people, security people, journalists, common people, men. Everywhere I got the impression everybody is talking of no normalcy. Everybody addressed Kashmir as a conflict zone, and the Kashmiris felt completely betrayed. Perhaps people may not know that in the 1965 war, when the Pakistanis, they inducted a lot of tribals. The whole idea was, this was in August of 1965. 65 war happened in 3 phases. This was the second phase of the war. The whole idea was, it was called Operation Gibraltar by the Pakistan Army, that they will go and mingle with the crowd, with the Kashmiris, and then they will provoke the Kashmiris to rise up against India. And what did the Kashmiris do in 65? In 65, they actually caught hold of these fellows, the intruders, and they handed them over to the police, the local police. The whole operation failed. And the impressions that I have got, and this is the truth, the way they feel betrayed about 370, something which was there all along, in whatever way, we will have the opposite effect of what happened in 1965. We will have more problems have been created in the hinterland in case of a war with Pakistan. That is what has been done. Now, the other thing what happened is that because a new map was created, Ladakh as a union territory, you create a map. There was no border ever. Ever is the word. The British tried to make a border. When the British Empire was here, they tried that there should be a border between Tibet and Ladakh, but the Chinese never accepted that. Now, where there was no border, you, by cartographic aggression, you created new maps and you created a border which the Chinese rejected. They said that you have created a border where there was none, and we do not accept that. As a consequence of this, they rubbished all the agreements done by the previous government, all the protocols since 1993. And in April, May of 2020, they came and sat on our territory, and they are still sitting there. Now they are not only sitting there. Now you see, there is a big difference. Yesterday we had, as you may be aware, that today 13th round of military talks is going on. For a very small thing, they are looking only at hot springs and if they can have some sort of a disengagement there. Nothing significant. But the Army Chief, General Naravane, he made a statement that our troops are there because the PLA is not going away. They have built up the infrastructure. They are increasing the infrastructure. They are bringing in more troops. They are bringing in more weapons. So we also have to now hold the line, and it looks like that we will be here this winter also. There is a difference. The difference is that where we are there, the Indian Army is there just to make sure that they don't push us This is called gray zone operations, below the war threshold level. They don't push us and occupy more territory. This is what the Indian Army is doing there. But what the PLA is doing, they are doing training for war. That is their permanent habitat where they have come to stay, thanks to the Modi government, because of creation of the Ladakh Union Territory maps, the new map. It has become their permanent habitat. It has become their operational launch pad. When they decide to launch the war against India, it will come from there. That is what will happen. And once again, I must take back, I must bring in Shiv Shankar Menon, who was the National Security Advisor. Look, I don't know Shiv Shankar Menon. The reason I'm bringing him, I brought him in an earlier argument, I'm bringing him now is because as an NSA, you are supposed to be a strategist. And what is a strategist? A strategist is a person who provides the bridge between the political leadership and the military leadership. He's the man who is supposed to understand military power and how to use the military power to achieve the political objectives. Now, he made a statement that it is perfectly possible for India to create an active defense deterrence against Pakistan and China so that we can build offensive capabilities in the Indian Ocean region. I'll come to the offensive capabilities in my third point, which I will make. Let me just dwell on what he said, that it is possible to create a deterrence against China and Pakistan. I'm shocked hearing this. Why I'm shocked is because the Chinese, we should know, at least if you make a statement like this, China is preparing for an entirely different war today. I'm sure as professionals, you are aware of artificial intelligence and disruptive technologies, which will change the commerce, the trade, the way we live. It will change everything, and it will change warfare also. It will make warfare robotized. And this is precisely what is happening. And this whole tech war that we keep hearing, the tech war is going on between China and America. This is about this AI and trying to deny these things, the semiconductors, to the Chinese. So the point I'm making is, how can you create a deterrence when you are fighting a war which is 30 years old against an enemy like the Chinese, the People's Liberation Army, which is now training for robotized war, sitting in the theater in the Tibet Autonomous Region? That is the point I'm making. It is a different war. Various names have been given to this war. The Chinese call it intelligence-sized war. There are American generals which have given different names, like war of cognition. Then they are calling it hyper war. Then algorithmic war. And the Defense Secretary, General Lloyd Austin, he recently called it integrated deterrence. I will explain this. In other words, it's a different war altogether. So that is my second point, that by this 370 and creating of maps, you have given the reason for, first of all, Pakistan and China to operate together in Ladakh, and which is what is happening. They are training together today. There is a report which came last week that the Pakistani officers are actually sitting in the key command center of the Western Theater Command of the PLA, which is responsible for the theater against India. They are sitting there planning the thing. That is for Ladakh. And then they have created a new structure called Tibet Military Command, which is specifically for Tibet, which is South Tibet. What is our Arunachal Pradesh? So we have now actually, the PLA has come there, and these guys, Pakis, are getting ready for a war. So why will the war happen now? That is what brings me to third point. The third point is about Quad. Now, quadrilateral dialogue is a dialogue between four nations, which is America, Japan, Australia, and India. You know, this whole thing started sometimes in 2004 when there was a tsunami in Indonesia, when the four countries came together. Well, that is all history. I'm not going into that. With the coming of the Biden administration and before that, the Trump administration, as you all would be aware, the Modi government in a hurry signed 3 military foundation agreements with the Americans in quick succession. Now, for the Americans, it is important that you sign the 4 foundation agreements, something that the Manmohan Singh government was reluctant to do. Because what it means is sharing of data. What it means is that you get integrated into what is called the integrated defense, into their war. They say that we will help you with space capabilities, we will help you with cyber, but what if they work the other way around? I mean, every country has to see their own interest. Americans will not fight our war, we have to fight our own war. If that be so, what stops them? They have those cyber capabilities. I'm not saying they'll do it, but what stops them from extracting all our understanding all our capabilities, which is why they are, you see, they don't want the S-400 also to come in. They've been saying that we have to take a decision on this. So nothing stops them working the other way around with us. But as far as we are concerned, for example, Shiv Shankar Menon spoke about that we can build offensive capabilities in the Indian Ocean region with Quad as the core. Now, Quad is being run by the Americans. Quad is something which is meant for their strategy, which is the Indo-Pacific strategy. It is their war. It is their war against China's rise. It is their war to make sure that the Chinese Maritime Silk Road, which is part of the Belt and Road Initiative, which goes through the Indian Ocean region, its options are constrained. It is their war to see that the digital Silk Road, which is part of the Belt and Road Initiative, which is meant to take commerce to the next level, the level from digitization, which is information supremacy, to intelligence supremacy, which is artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, 5G, wireless communications, cloud. This is what the world is looking at, and this is the 4th industrial revolution. They want to stop that. They don't want the Chinese standards to be accepted by the large part of the world, because that means then on their standards, the interoperability will be done by the other countries. They don't want that, and we are joining that. So the point I'm making is very simple. As far as these 4 countries are concerned, as you are also aware, that recently there was an AUKUS deal, which is Australia, UK, and US. Basically, the Australians, they had a contract with the French for the conventional submarines. They canceled that contract. And because now the Britishers and the Americans, they are saying that we'll give you nuclear powered submarines. So that is another dimension which is added. But mind you, this will not come in a hurry. This will take 10 years to come. It makes sensational news, but to get this capability will take at least 10 years for the Australian Navy. It will not happen tomorrow. And by that time, the robotization of the sea capabilities would have happened. So the war would change. The point I'm making is very simple, that amongst these 4 nations that I mentioned, America, Japan is very clear. Japan is a military ally of the Americans, but at the same time, it wants to maintain its trade ties with China. It will only go to that extent and no more. And Japan has technology. It is a self-imposed restriction that they have put on themselves. Then you have Australia, and then you have India. See, India is the weakest link in these 4. Why weakest? Because we don't have a vibrant defense industry. Why is the industry required? Because if tomorrow there is a war, you want ammunition, you want your systems, you want things, you want an industry that your own surge can be done for war. We cannot do that. In all the wars you have seen in Kargil also, Kargil conflict, we had bureaucrats taking the suitcases, a lot of reports came, put dollars in that, trying to get ammunition from abroad, which is not the case with Chinese. Chinese have automated defense industry. It is totally automated, robotic. We don't have any, how do you go to war with a country like that? We don't have technology. As I said, we are working on something like 30 years old technology and war thinking. The war thinking is 30 years old. So money will not help you. I heard, you see at India Today Enclave, somebody saying and asking Shiv Shankar Menon, how can we compete with China? He says, if we have 12% of GDP, oh, you can have that. But you should know what you want to acquire first. You should know what your adversary has. You should understand artificial intelligence. You should understand emerging technology. You should understand robotization of war. You are nowhere there. So in other words, you see, this is precisely what the Modi government did right from the beginning in 2014. When Prime Minister Modi said that the threat is terrorism, as I said, terrorism is not a threat, it's a strategy. That is the time he also changed upturned the Manmohan Singh government policy. His policy was Look East policy, and he called it Modi government policies Act East policy, Act East policy, with a focus on maritime domain. Maritime domain is where the Americans are. It is the American war, I keep repeating. And next week, we are having a very big exercise of the Quad in the Bay of Bengal, Malabar exercise, where all three countries' navies are joining. Isn't this provoking China at a time when you don't even understand the technology, that you don't understand your war? They are sitting inside your house. You see, the problem is, this is what I keep saying. You professionals who are associated with Congress, you have to take these issues up. You professionals understand all these matters, what I'm talking about. The thing is that we, amongst the three things, as I said, politicization has weakened the military leadership's intellectual level. That has gone down substantially. Then the second was creation of the maps has got now the Chinese sitting on our territory and preparing for war. And the third thing will be they hitting the weakest link of the Quad. The weakest link of the four nations is India. This is the weakest link. If they have to break Quad, they will break the weakest link. You don't have to be a soothsayer to say that, look, this is what will happen. The writing is on the wall. So the point why the whole idea, when I was approached, I said, this is a great idea. Let me talk to the professionals who are associated, because you are the guys who can then come up with some catchy slogans. I mean, Congress is a pan-India party, the only party which is pan-India. So I thought I will just discuss that how much national security has deteriorated under the Modi government. And I'm not giving you any classified thing. I'm giving you state analysis based on the evidence which is there. And why I'm sharing all this is because I have served the army for a couple of years. I feel very sorry and sad that in 7 years, where national security has come, we always maintained a balance between the two fronts. Now everything has been rubbished. It's been thrown in the bin. Both the borders are live. And we seem to be completely sleeping, being comatose about the whole thing. So my point is, we are today closer to a war with China, and the nuclear aspect will not work. This is the last thing I must tell you. Our nuclear weapons were supposed to deter China. Did they deter China from occupying a supposed 1,000 square kilometers of our territory? No. They have not deterred. They are sitting there. Why? Because the correct narrative is not being told to the people. The correct narrative always is, when you conventional capability, you have a nuclear capability, you need deterrence in both. That is when the other side will not go to war. For example, for all this hype that goes on in Taiwan and goes on in South China, see, I can give you in writing, there will be no war between China and America. For the simple reason, they both have a deterrence at the conventional level, at the nuclear level, and neither side will go to war because neither side can control the escalation. Neither side will be able to do a war control, which is not the case between China and India. So I would urge you all to think deep about what all I have said. And I'm very happy for the discussion now. Thank you.
Mr. Sawhney, thank you very much for a fairly exhaustive critique of where the 7 years past have led us. As a technology professional, one of the aspects that you spoke of, this war of cognition and an algorithmic war, which are essential components of total war that Chinese doctrine propounds, resonated. The question I have is, given that we have a fairly vibrant IT services sector, as well as core defense hardware and software capabilities built into our public sector units, why is it that we are unable to counter on the technology side of things effectively?
See, this is a very good question, a question which has been raised so many times before. Here is my answer. Now, what we need is, first of all, we need semiconductors. We need the chips. And we need to be a capability for the chip design. We don't have. We need a capability of fabrication of chips. We don't have. Basically, the designs are coming from outside. I mean, we have a Huawei center, I'm told, in Bangalore, where there are 10,000 people employed. So we are not doing the core things. All the core things are coming from there. Then what we need is, for this war of cognition, we need data centers. And huge data centers, the government has to get involved in this. It is not something that the startups can do. It is not about them. The talent is there. I'm not denying that. But the point is, where is the policy? Please understand, in 2017, China came up with a comprehensive policy on artificial intelligence. And that is what has got the American hackers up there. And that is where they decided we need to deny them the chips. And now see about 5G. Please understand that there was a last auction which was done. Nobody, you see, the 5G is still not there. Because instead of the government reducing the price, the auction price, you don't have to make profit on certain things. You have to help the people, you have to help the professionals. So all this requires a policy. I won't want to go in more details because this is part of the book that I have just submitted to the publishers. But I hope I've been able to put across, because I keep hearing that we have professionals. Yes, we have professionals. But can we write the original algorithms? Even today, the basic algorithms, the core, what is called the core algorithms, they have been written by the Americans and the Chinese are using it. You see, of all the things, when you talk of artificial intelligence, the core hardware and the core software is still with the Americans. And that is where now the Chinese have decided that we need to put in a lot of money there, especially to get the hardware. And the Americans today are thinking of that we need to have the entire thing of the chips within America. We cannot have it distributed. We cannot have it spread all over. We cannot be going to Taiwan for our fabrication. So you see, we have people, I mean, after all, the head of Google, the head of Microsoft are Indians. They started here. I'm not denying the talent. Where is the policy? Then where is the finances? Where is the withal? See, all these things take years. If you want to set up a fabrication, manufacturing, who will come and help you? And why will he help you? He will help you. He will certainly make India a hub for his exports. He will give you the designs. He will give you everything. And you will, and same is the story with our PSUs. Our key things, our key systems, our power packs, engines, everything comes from outside. It's not made here. When we talk of our shipping industry, what are we making? We are just making the hulls here and very little in the other things. You see, when you talk of an industry, please understand, the proof is in the pudding. Please ask yourself, how much export, defense export is India doing? Ask yourself. Zero. We are only supporting our armed forces. And how can you set up production lines when you're not exporting? And why is the country not buying? Why is it China is exporting today? It's become the 4th largest exporter in the world, and we are nowhere on the scene. So you see, it's not a question of the peripherals that we make here. I mean, even the Americans who are selling us today sophisticated weapon platforms, Apache, they are asking us to do some peripheral things, make you see these windows or such things, but not the key components. They're all coming from outside. In fact, it works out expensive for us. When you talk of Make in India actually is expensive. You can check in defense. I'm talking only of defense. You see, then if you were just to buy off the shelf, but it makes good copy. It's a big thing that under the present government, Make in India is doing great. But where are the exports? Please show me. So I hope I have been able to answer you.
Yes, you have. I think the distinction you drew between human capabilities and talent and resources and the presence of a vision, a strategy, and a policy to drive capabilities in the manufacturing sector are two very different things. Thank you for delineating delineating that distinction. At this stage, I'd like to ask Ashok Maridas. First of all, thank you very much, Ashok, for facilitating this fascinating conversation. I just wanted also to check if you have any initial comments to make at this stage.
Thank you, Santosh, and thank you, sir. I'm still learning, so I'm not sure if I have the capacity to comment. Just as a citizen, I'm just concerned. I'm very clear after your presentation. I've heard this is the second, third presentation I'm hearing, and very clear that we are in a mess. Okay, so how is it that we can secure our borders? Simple question. And what is it that we can do as professionals, as citizens? Because as much as we want the change in leadership, that's going to be some time away. So what is it that we can do in the immediate future? Because we seem to be on a losing spree. What is it that we can do, sir? Thank you.
So we can do three things, and there's no escaping that. And I don't expect the present government to do those three things. The first thing is we have to be honest. We have to be honest to ourselves. We have to first accept that, yes, this Make in India and defense needs a policy to begin with. It needs patience. It needs finances. It needs very hard research and development. It will not happen overnight. There will be no magic. Number two, you have to make peace with Pakistan, which we won't do if we want our prosperity. And third, Prime Minister has to pick up the phone and speak with Xi Jinping. That is where the cooperation has to begin. Nobody wants war. You see, but they have a capability for a swift war and to accomplish all their objectives. But this is something that the government has to realize, that you don't draw political mileage. I mean, if you are more concerned about winning elections, then at the cost of, I'm dare to say, and I'm sorry to say, at the cost of sovereignty of India, then there's nothing really that anybody can advise them. I hope I've answered you.
Thank you. On behalf of Ashok, I believe you have addressed where the starting point is. One of the points that you made very correctly is the maritime aspects of national security, and you spoke of the unequal partnerships that we are setting up and the unnecessary provocations some of the actions of those partnerships might lead to. So this leads me to a question that was asked by Mugeez Khan. Thank you, Mugeez, for your question. His question was, how mature do you think India's assets are for continuous mountain and maritime warfare operations?
Yeah, thank you for the question. As I said, you see, we don't make much systems within the country. That is one. For example, when this happened, I'll give you an example. When this happened suddenly, for which we were not prepared, this May 2020, the PLA came and sat on our territory. We had to request America to give us the clothing, the high altitude warm clothing for our soldiers. There's nothing which has been produced here, and this is a very small thing. You see, this is the unfortunate part. Look, our PSUs, I understand a simple thing, that if any company is doing business, the motive has to be profit. The motive has to be exports. If that motive is not there, then obviously you're not doing business, you're doing something else. So the point I'm making is that we are against a very formidable power, a power which is competing with America, which has got the Americans challenged. It's not an ordinary power, please understand, both in terms of the commercial trade. I mean, today the Chinese are there in all global supply chains. People keep talking of decoupling of supply chains. Sorry, I'm digressing to make the point. Keep talking of this. I mean, how do you do that? How do you decouple? How do you take the Chinese out of the supply chains? Similarly, in war, they are, as I said, in war concepts, how you fight a war. They are something like 30 years ahead of us, because all the while we were only focused on Pakistan. And with Pakistan, we could go and get and buy something from the Russians. Even the Russians today will not give you cutting edge technology. They'll give you nothing. I mean, Russians today are more friendly with Pakistan, and the reasons are very obvious. So the point is that we have hitched on. Look, America is a great country. America is still the #1 power. But the point is, it should register in our minds that the risen second power is China. And China is our neighbor we have to contend with. America, as of now, I will not call a declining power, but it's a power which is actually relative to China. I mean, for example, by 2030, the GDP of the Chinese will be double that of the Americans. So this is the type of money they have to invest in the R&D, and they're doing it. How do you compete with them? So the only way to do that is you have to first make peace with them. And then a sensible government has to sit down and think, what is my policy? What do I do? How can I take on two, adversaries? Both are formidable. Why is Pakistan formidable? Pakistan is formidable because it is getting the interoperability it has with the Chinese. It is getting all the equipment. It is getting all the spare parts, the ammunition from the Chinese. In a war, it will not be short of things. You will be short of things. because you're getting your stuff from outside. All your specialized ammunition is being imported. Our 41 ordnance factories are not making that. Somebody has to ask why they are not making it. So you see, it is a very complicated situation, but if you are willing to face the truth, you will find the answers. That is my response. I hope I have answered you.
Thank you, Mr. Soni. Varghese, you had indicated you had a question to ask. Could you please chime in?
Yeah, thanks, Santosh. And first of all, I would like to thank Praveen sir for this wonderful interaction with all of us. So my question would be more of political in nature. So, and it is pretty simple. And that is, wasn't the surgical strike in quotes just a political drama than a military operation, than showing our strength? Wasn't it a kind of a shrewd political statement that the current regime wanted to do?
So, perhaps you missed that initial part when I was talking all this. Basically, what I said is that the first thing the Modi government did was it politicized the military. It politicized the army. Politicization basically means that the army is not doing what it is supposed to do. It is doing something that the political leadership wants for its own political purpose. So surgical strike comes under that category. It exposed our weakness to the adversary. I mean, I can explain if you want once again the whole thing, but in a very short thing, basically, no government should do, in my assessment, a thing like this. Use your military. And the military leadership is complicit in this. That is the point. I mean, the military leadership should have stood up and said, hey, this is not a political, it is not a military objective, it's a political objective. I mean, you've already become chiefs. What do you want? Go home. I mean, that is the reason General Bipin Rawat, who was the architect of this surgical strike, he was made the CDS. And please recall, he superseded 2 officers when he became, in December 2016, the chief of the army staff. And the reason given by the government was that he has been chosen because he is an expert in counter-terror operations. I was trying to explain that counter-terror operation is a strategy. Terrorism is a strategy of the Pakistanis. The threat is Pakistan military. Now you have made, because you only want that we keep fighting terrorism. See, today we have become so immune and so hardened to the loss of our young soldiers every day. They don't even make any headlines. You see? So this is the state that the country has come to. Nobody is seeing all these things, and it's the professionals who have to take up these issues. So yes, you are absolutely right. The surgical strike, it can be said with a definitiveness today. It was meant to be used for political purposes, and so was the Balakot air attacks of 2019. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that, Varghese and Mr. Soni. Ramakrishnan Venkateshwaran asked a question related to something that I have observed as well. Which is the distressing deterioration of our relationships with neighboring countries over the last 7 years. The fairly warm strategic alliances that we had built across our neighborhood seem to have been replaced with quite transactional relationships. And also, if I can venture to say it, a certain bit of animosity has built up. Thanks to both domestic policies that are viewed unfavorably, as well as the deterioration of the relationship itself. So Ramakrishnan Venkateshwaran asks, the entire region seems quite fragile for India, with China influencing every country across except India. So what happens if a war breaks out? Has India been painted itself into a corner and gotten isolated? The second part of his question is also something quite interesting. He asks, our long association with the non-aligned movement has become sort of defunct. So do we need to sort of revive that strategy around non-alignment and coalescing of countries across the planet in a world which was thought of as unipolar until recently, but has again started becoming multipolar? Is non-alignment found new relevance?
Yeah, actually, these are good questions. And let me respond by saying that what has happened is, except for India and Bhutan, all our neighborhood is on board the Belt and Road Initiative of the China. Everybody has signed to that. In other words, the Chinese are here in our region today. The Chinese are here. They are building infrastructure. We can keep talking of debt trap. The fact of the matter is that this Belt and Road Initiative is a very expansive thing. As I said, it at some stage, it has a third strand. It is about land building infrastructure. And it is also about building the digital capabilities for a nation, the digital industry. In other words, the world today, because of the fourth industrial revolution, where the Chinese are in the forefront, it is moving from a retail internet to an industrial internet. And this is where all these countries, our neighbors, they know that at some stage they will get the benefit and they'll have prosperity. And until the Chinese came here with the Belt and Road, basically we were the biggest nation here and we honestly could bully them. Now these smaller countries, they have an option. They have an option, and which what we see today as their belligerence. But the point is that today they have an option of seeing their national interest foremost than their relationship with India. And that is what has happened. And this will keep happening. This will keep happening unless we are willing to cooperate with China. And let me tell you, in 10 years from now, the situation that I foresee is so gloomy that India will be rendered strategically irrelevant in its own neighborhood. And that is what will happen. If you want to explain, me to explain this, I can do that. Coming to the war thing. Now, you see, the war is, if there is a war between China and India, so some sort of an airspace of the other neighbors will also be used. But let me leave it at this by saying that it will be a very short war. It will be a decisive war. It will be an occupational war, and it will not be a war of attrition. Let me explain what is war of attrition. War of attrition is what India and Pakistan always fight, where it is about how many soldiers we killed and how many soldiers you have killed, how much of damage air power has done here and how much is done there. This is not the war that the PLA will fight. So what will the PLA fight? When I say war of cognition, it is basically putting the military and the political leadership under stress. Let me explain by an example. The example is, please recall, on 15th of June 2020, Galwan happened. In Galwan, we lost 20 soldiers. They say that they lost 4, could be more. 10 of our soldiers were taken prisoners of war by the Chinese. Now, what happened after 4 days? And mind you, in the Galwan crisis or the clash, not a single round was fired. It was all about using those primitive weapons for the simple reason, anybody should have thought that even the Chinese don't want war. They actually don't want war at this stage because they are preparing for the war, for a different war. That is the reason that they were prepared and they used all these primitive unconditional weapons. But what did we do? On the 19th, just 4 days after Galwan, the Prime Minister, our Prime Minister, at an all-party meeting, he made that astonishing statement that nobody has come in our territory. कोई नहीं आया है हमारे इसमें area के अंदर. What does that mean to the Chinese? What it meant to the Chinese was that, look, we have not even started the war. This is what is called the gray zone operations before the threshold of war. And basically the political leadership has buckled in. In other words, it is quite possible that a war of cognition, they will lose very fast when they will see things coming from, see, this war the Chinese are preparing for will be a multi-dimensional, multi-domain war. It will be an entirely different war, which will affect the cognition capabilities. It will confuse the military leadership, confuse the political leadership, and that is their aim. Presently, what is going on, these talks that I spoke about, the 13th round of talks, it was after that 19th, you see, June 2020, when Prime Minister Modi said what he said, that the Chinese were clear that everything will happen, the disengagement will happen on our terms. And that is precisely what is happening, on their terms. So I hope I have answered your question.
Thank you, Mr. Sawhney. Girish Bandeppa had a question on current developments in the region, namely the astonishing collapse of the previous Afghan regime and the rise of the Taliban back into power there. What impact would it have on India's national security? So, of course, China looks at it. China seems to be progressing quite a bit in their balancing act there. Their primary areas of concern are that terror should not be exported from out of Afghanistan into Chinese territory, and the Belt and Road Initiative should not be compromised. What impact do you think the Taliban's return is going to have on national security in India?
Okay, it's a very good question. First of all, the countries which have an impact on what will happen after the Taliban. See, first of all, the Taliban in Afghanistan, they have to bring stability there. They need a lot of money, humanitarian aid. They were recently in talks with the Americans. So, except for the Americans and the Indians, which have closed down their embassy in Afghanistan, the countries which still have their embassy, we have to consider those countries. They were in talks with America primarily because of humanitarian aid, that should be allowed through the UN, structures. Now, the countries which will have an influence on this government, first of all, this Taliban government has to stabilize, which is a very big thing. For stability, the Americans are saying, and everybody is saying, China is saying, Russia is saying, Pakistan is saying, that it should be an inclusive government. That means all the tribes, everything should be representative in the Taliban. It should not be a pure Taliban government in Afghanistan because it will not have stability. So the key countries which will influence Afghanistan are Pakistan, China, Iran, the first three tier. Then you have the Central Asian republics, you have Russia and Turkey. India is not on the scene, period. So anybody who's, you are writing here reams and reams of paper. The fact of the matter is that we are not involved. We do not have a physical border with Afghanistan. That's one. Now, the second thing is, how will it affect Kashmir? Look, I do not ascribe to this view at all that all the military top brass and everybody, we will see it in the coming days, that now they will send more of their mercenaries here. Taliban are not in this game. They are not in this game for the simple reason they are sons of the soil. They have their own culture, they have their own religion, they have created a Islamic Afghanistan, they want stability there. Now, whether there will be stability, whether there will be civil war, we have to wait and watch. It will depend on how these countries, the two tiers that I mentioned, they will help them. As far as India is concerned, what are we worried about? In any case, as I mentioned, the situation today within Kashmir, where the Kashmiri feels betrayed, is not stable, for God's sake. On top of that, there are enough, today Pakistan has enough power because all these years, especially the last 7 years, we never considered the Pakistan army as the threat. They have been training with the Chinese the last 7 years. And we've been fighting this terrorism, counter-terror operations. So whatever they want to send, they will send. And they are sending in whatever way they want to send. This is their strategy. See, terrorism is a strategy. The proxy war is a strategy. How they modify the strategy, I do not see any involvement of Taliban in Afghanistan in that. What we keep hearing from our thinkers here in this India, that will not happen. This is something that the Pakis will determine, the Pakistan army will determine. And they have that capability to determine. Their ISI is very good in this matter. And ISI, especially, it was created in 1948, especially for this purpose, to use the tribals, which they used in the first war of Kashmir in 47-49 against India. After that, they created in 48 ISI. And since then, they have perfected this through various campaigns. So they will decide how much to send in. They will decide what is the situation within the valley, what is going on. We have inducted so many troops there. So to talk of Taliban, I think they have enough worries of their own. They're not really looking at exporting terror to Kashmir or India. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Soni. Khalid Mirza has an interesting question. Given the historical context and the near unanimous conclusions one can draw that war is ruinous for all participants, victors and losers, the question he has is there any viable collective strategy across the region that ensures peace amidst all of this talk of war and preparing for war? Is there a strategy that can be developed? Are there things like people-to-people contact and so on that can sort of facilitate an atmosphere of peace and avoid war?
See, until a war is joined, a war can always be avoided. Nobody wants war. But the problem is that today Pakistan feels that it is in a strong position insofar as Kashmir is concerned. Today, China feels that by creating this Ladakh Union Territory, making the new maps, India has affected their sovereignty, which is unacceptable to them. So the only way I would want to tell Khalid, and this is not something, strategies is first you have to face the truth and you have to face reality. And as I said, you have to talk with Pakistan. People-to-people contact will not help. It is very limited. Things have gone too far. This revocation of 370 has changed the entire geostrategy of the region, the geopolitics of the region, which we don't seem to understand when this was done. Nobody put this in a calculation. It was more like this is something that the BJP had it. It's like the nuclear test of 1998. It has not helped us, it's helped Pakistan. But it was on their list, it had to be ticked. It was done by the Vajpayee government. Now this government has done this revocation of 370. So the strategy is very simple. Please talk to Pakistan. Because we want peace, we want our prosperity. But if you have religious fault lines within the country, how do you talk to Pakistan is the problem. So I hope I have answered Khalid.
Thank you, Mr. Soni. I believe you have. A question from Dr. Masood. Dr. Masood asks about the Sino-Russian relationship. Is there a relationship there? Is there a strategic alliance? What kind of developments might take place between those two countries? And another question he has is on another topical development. Xi Jinping brought up this whole reunification thing recently. So what do you think China's plans are going to be? Are there going to be moves made on Taiwan soon?
Okay. So first of all, there are today three what is called the geostrategic players in the world. By definition, a geostrategic player is a country which has the capability and the political will to influence events in a big way far beyond their geography. And those three countries today in the world are America, China, and Russia. What the Americans have done is in their 2018 national security strategy and the defense strategy, they have identified Russia and China as the two problems, and China being the bigger problem. This is one good reason for the Chinese and the Russians to have a very close partnership. A partnership which is military in nature, which is geopolitical in nature, geostrategic in nature, and which is technical in nature. That is what they have done. So it is basically now it is America pitted against two other rival geostrategic players. So they have all the reasons to be together, and that is precisely what we are saying. And this relationship will thicken. It will thicken for the simple reason that once we have this Congress, which is coming up in 2020, the 20th Congress, the Party Congress, in all probably Xi Jinping will be made the president for life. So Xi Jinping and Putin have a personal rapport. So this will grow, and this will grow to Pakistan's benefit and to our disadvantage. That's your question number one. Question number two, reunification. What Xi Jinping spoke about. As I said a little while back in my presentation, there is no question of a war in the Taiwan Strait or South China Sea or East China Sea, for the simple reason that here are two powers. Both have created, it's China versus American forces, the US Pacific Command. They both have deterrence. They both understand that they cannot do a war control, that if a war is joined, so they will not be able to control the escalation. So all we are witnessing, and we will keep witnessing, are the heightened things. You see these maneuvers, these probings which go on in the Taiwan Straits. So they are all below the threshold of war. The shot will not be fired. That is what we will see, which cannot be said of what is going on between China and India, is the point I was making. I hope I have answered Dr. Masood.
Thank you, Mr. Soni. Thank you again for the patient responses you're given. I have just asked Jagdish Keshav to unmute himself. I believe he has a question for you.
Yeah, hi. Good evening, Mr. Soni. Of course, first of all, I have nothing to disagree upon what you have mentioned. Since I've been writing about international current events for a long time as a columnist for the media, international media specifically, from what I see is that India is in a total disarray or confusion since 2014. Till 2014, we had got a solid foreign policy on. We knew where India was heading, where India was supposed to head. But since 2014, of course, as we all know that everything went haywire, And now it is, going in a direction which is, like a headless, chicken running around like that. But of course, and there was a couple of other things I would, of course, would want to mention is that there was this group of countries where India had a prominent position and a prominent role. One was, of course, BRICS, BRICS and RIC, Russia, India, and China. They've been meeting, the heads of these three states have been meeting every year since the last 12 to 14 years. And of course, it was not only political, but they used to, as I know, as somebody who's been in journalism, that even strategic affairs were discussed between the heads of these three countries, Russia, China, and India. And since India made this foolish move of joining the Quad, which was not necessary at all, because China was never a threat to India, as we all know that, and the India-China border was, as somebody who was in the army, so you will know that, it was kind of unarmed. The most heavily armed sector was the Indo-Pakistani, front, but India-China front was almost unarmed. Hence we saw this unarmed fight between the two groups also, and it's been an unmarked boundary for the longest time. And you rightly mentioned, that demarcation of Ladakh and Jammu and Kashmir started this, and the foolish, proclaimed by Amit Shah that I forgot the name, that part is going to be a part of India soon, and they made these foolish statements, without any provocation. So to me, with all this going on between India and China, that India has been the one who's provoked. China was going along, and in fact, we all know that during certain days of Diwali or any other function, both the soldiers would cross each other's borders and dance around to some Bollywood songs. That was a kind of relationship which was present till 2014. But Mr. Modi, in all his brilliance, he wanted to get too close to America, and which is not a good idea. I lived in the US for the last 20 years, and what I would like to say is that America is never a good friend to anybody. It is a very selfish nation, and as you mentioned again, one of the agreements they would want to have with India is to probably use India's military bases, which is going to be a dangerous thing. Once they come in, nobody will be able to move out. And making friends of the immediate neighborhoods and Russia, of all people, the most trusted friends for the longest time, India is pushing them away. And thanks to again, this foolish leadership we have. And the military leadership too, it's very much, within the pockets of this, the Sangh Parivar, I can call it. And that is exactly, a very dangerous thing what's going for India. And again, if there is a war, it's going to be a very short war, as you said. It's going to be probably within a week, everything will be over. It's going to be not going to be a typical warfare, soldiers with bayonets, fighting each other. It's not going like that. You're right about that. So India is not at all doing well on any front, and economically also, as everybody should know, that Indian industries are completely depending on Chinese components. Without that, in the Indian pharma sector or the automobile sector, any of these industries won't function without China. Banning Chinese apps was easy for Modi government to do, but stopping Chinese exports to India, he cannot do it. There's all some kind of heroism he's trying to show off, 50-60 chest or whatever you call it. So, but all in his foolishness, India has taken a very bad beating on the world stage. India had a prominent role all these years, even in the United Nations or non-aligned movement or beat any of this, SCO or ALBA. There's so many things. India was an active participant during Dr. Manmohan, till Dr. Manmohan Singh's time. And I don't know which direction India is going to go. And more or less, that's all I wanted to tell you. Thank you.
Yeah, see, overall, I understand what you're saying, and yeah, we all are concerned about it. Since you haven't asked the question, so I leave it at that. Yeah, we all are concerned about what you are saying. And that is the whole idea, that people like us have to think deeply about exactly where the country is going and see whatever we can do within our own capabilities to counter that. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Soni. Ramesh Ambasta had a question for you, Ramesh, if you could ask. Thanks.
Thank you, Santosh. Hi, good evening, Mr. Sani. My name is Ramesh. I am part of AIPC in Bangalore South here. It's a pleasure listening to you and getting a lot of insight, which has given my two questions. One is subjective and one is objective. The objective question is, most of the strategies it is my understanding, most of the strategies are short-term, whether it is Quad, whether it is the surgical strike and all, right? That is the first question. The second question is, how do you see that these short-term initiatives or short-term decisions are impacting the economy? And is it because of the economy, we are not diving deep or leveraging the skills we have in technology and fighting well or growing well in industrialization 4.0? Thank you, sir.
Okay, both are good questions, and let's talk of strategy first. See, strategy, when we say short term or long term, the term doesn't matter. The strategy is basically a capability where the political objectives, for example, our political objective is prosperity of India. We want India to prosper. Let's say this is our political objective. So where do you use your military power? So strategy basically is how do you achieve your ends with your national power. Now it can be short term, it can be long term, is not the issue at all. So we, I keep hearing we don't have a strategy. Look, first of all, you just need a bit of a clarity. What does the government want? Are you looking at a national good? Are you looking at a party good? What do you want? Because anything you do domestically has an impact on the relations with nations outside. So the clarity has to be there. That's all. You don't need a written document for a country like India. We are not a major power. Now, your second question was about economy. Okay, when we talk of hard power, when we say hard power, and hard power is very important between orders. One order, unipolar order, is now becoming a multipolar order. And I believe that towards the end of the second half of this century, we will lead to the unipolar order. That will happen. This is my assessment. So hard power becomes very important when you are between orders. And hard power has three components. It has technology, it has economy, and it has military power. And mind you, of these three, the most important is the technology power, because the technology drives your economy. As I said, that today the world is moving from the third industrial revolution to the fourth industrial revolution, where there will be more prosperity. Your economy will boom. So technology. And technology drives your military power. And technology, no country shares with the other country. And which is why the technology war is going on between US and China. So it is not about economy so much, it is about technology. And especially at the time like this, when we are between, you see, we talk of till, recorded history, not really recorded history, till we sort of mankind, let's call it recorded history. There have been 4 industrial revolutions. You see, there were only 4. So the first one, when we say the first, was about the steam engine. Steam engine came and mechanization happened and everything changed. And then you had the second industrial revolution came with the invention of electricity. It again changed everything. And between the first and the second, there is a gap of 150 years or 200 years. The third one, again, there was a big gap between the second and the third, which was digitization. The internet came towards the beginning of this century. This century, the 21st century, the internet came towards, around 2000 or late 90s, the internet came. And because of the internet, the digitization started. That is the third industrial revolution. Now the gap between the third and the fourth industrial revolution, which is about intelligence, artificial intelligence, is very less. They are basically overlapping, which is why the tech war is going on. Because the Americans fear that the Chinese, instead of competing with them in the third industrial revolution, they can leapfrog into the fourth. Because in the lead of the fourth industrial revolution will be the wireless connectivity. Because it is a wireless connectivity which will drive the Internet of Things. You see, your Internet of Things, your artificial intelligence, your cloud, these are the things which will matter. In the fourth industrial revolution, your big data. And this is where they are worried. So in my assessment, the key thing is everybody keeps talking that if we have 12%, I mean, Shiv Shankar was there on the India Today enclave and he spoke about India can compete with China if you have 12%. No, you can't growth. No, you can't. You can't, because they are already way ahead of you in technology, and technology doesn't, you don't incubate technology, like a magic wand. It takes years. Your talent is going out of the country. So please understand all these things, and what the big companies, they have set their offices here is because they are getting they are getting the talent at a cheap rate. They're not sharing your cutting edge designs with you. They are giving you that, hey, look, guys, this is what it is, and please do it like this. And somebody is supervising that, and you are reporting that to the main headquarters back in the US. So in my assessment, the key thing is technology, which is where we are not focusing, and which is where I want the government to focus, to come up with a clear technology policy, which we don't have today. Everybody talks that we have got an IT sector which is doing very well. No, the IT sector is doing the routine job. The key algorithms, the foundation algorithms, the chips, they're all being written there outside. They are being fabricated outside. They are being designed outside. So because we have the talent, they are making use of that. That's all. I hope I've answered you.
You should have.
Yeah. I hope. Yeah, I've answered you. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sawhney. I am cognizant that we have significantly exceeded the time that we had set aside for this conversation, but the depth of analysis and the breadth of experience that you bring to bear seems to have stimulated a lot of conversation. I would like to bring the session to a close, but before that, I would like to add a personal note of appreciation. This has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you very much for spending this time.